Most people remember Patrick Swayze as the invincible star who taught the world to dance and believe in the afterlife. But in his final seconds, he whispered 3 simple words to his wife that left Hollywood in a state of total heartbreak. Why did these specific words change everything we thought we knew about the man behind the fame? Today, we go inside the room for Swayze's final, devastating goodbye. To truly understand the absolute gravity of those 3 words, you have to rewind the clock and deeply examine the man who was staring death in the face. Patrick Swayze was not just a Hollywood actor. He was a cultural archetype. In the 1980s and 90s, he represented a completely new, unprecedented kind of masculinity that the entertainment industry had never seen before. In Roadhouse, he was Dalton, the philosopher bouncer who famously stated that pain don't hurt. It was a line that became a pop culture staple, an anthem of untouchable, gritty masculine bravado. In Point Break, he threw himself out of airplanes and surfed 50-foot waves, cementing a legacy of adrenaline-fueled fearlessness. And yet, he possessed the grace, the profound vulnerability, and the soul of a classically trained dancer, which he immortalized forever in Dirty Dancing. He was the rare guy who could rip a man's throat out on screen one year and then make millions of people weep uncontrollably as a romantic ghost the next. His body was his primary instrument, his livelihood, and the very foundation of his global identity. He trained tirelessly. He studied elite ballet. He understood the complex mechanics of his own anatomy better than most professional athletes. His entire existence was built on an undeniable foundation of physical strength. So you must try to imagine the sheer psychological terror when, in January of 2008, that invincible instrument suddenly betrayed him. Swayze was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. For those who do not know the brutal reality of oncology, stage 4 pancreatic cancer is often considered a definitive death sentence. It is an invisible assassin that operates in the deep shadows of the body until it is far too late. The pancreas is buried deep within the abdomen, meaning highly aggressive tumors can grow undetected for months or even years. By the time noticeable symptoms finally appear, the cancer has almost always spread maliciously to other vital organs. The survival statistics are notoriously grim, with a 5-year survival rate hovering stubbornly around a terrifying single-digit percentage. When the prominent oncologists sat Patrick and his wife, Lisa Niemi, down in that sterile, fluorescent-lit hospital room, they were not offering a cure. They were merely offering a timeline. Most patients who receive this devastating news are given a highly optimistic 3 to 6 months to put their affairs in order. The sheer psychological weight of that horrific diagnosis would completely break a normal person. It would paralyze them with an insurmountable wave of existential dread. But Patrick Swayze fundamentally refused to be a medical statistic. He approached his terminal illness with the exact same relentless, almost punishing stoicism and work ethic that he applied to learning a complex dance routine or mastering a highly dangerous stunt. To understand his mindset in the face of death, you have to look at his history. This was a man who insisted on performing his own stunts, a man who danced beautifully on a blown-out knee with torn cartilage, a man who demanded absolute physical perfection from himself at all times. He viewed cancer not as an omnipotent grim reaper, but as a hostile opponent in a physical street fight. He immediately entered a highly aggressive treatment protocol, willingly subjecting himself to experimental clinical trials and physically punishing rounds of toxic chemotherapy. But here is the detail that the mainstream media completely glossed over, and it represents one of the most astonishing paradoxes of his entire life. Are you ready for this? While his body was literally being consumed by rapidly dividing tumors, Patrick Swayze signed on to star in a grueling television series called The Beast. He was playing an intense undercover FBI agent. He was working 12 to 16-hour days in the freezing, unforgiving Chicago winter. But that is not the shocking part. The shocking part is that during those intensely long shoots, while undergoing active chemotherapy for terminal pancreatic cancer, Patrick Swayze completely refused to take painkillers. Let that sink into your mind for a moment. He refused to take a single pain pill, not even a basic over-the-counter analgesic, because he firmly believed that the medication would dull his mental sharpness and permanently compromise the raw authenticity of his acting performance. He was actively dying, living every single minute in unimaginable, agonizing physical pain, yet his dedication to his craft was so deeply ingrained that he consciously chose to feel the torment of his own cellular destruction rather than deliver a mediocre performance. Imagine the visceral reality of that daily choice. Imagine waking up in the morning, your body ravaged by toxic chemotherapy chemicals, your internal organs slowly shutting down, your body weight plummeting, and actively deciding to turn down a simple, accessible pill that would stop the agonizing pain, just so you could look into a camera lens and deliver a genuine, unfiltered human emotion. He filmed 13 full episodes in this horrific condition. He was working through his weekends, pushing his failing body through complex, physically demanding action sequences. When the production finally wrapped, the studio logs revealed an impossible truth. Over the course of the entire grueling season, Patrick had only missed 1.5 days of work. This staggering display of willpower completely recontextualizes who Patrick Swayze actually was. The global media loved to casually portray him as a nostalgic heartthrob, a relic of 1980s romantic cinema. But in grim reality, he was an absolute warrior possessing an almost terrifying level of mental fortitude and focus. However, he did not fight this brutal war alone. His unshakable anchor throughout this entire nightmare was Lisa. Their relationship was a massive anomaly in the notoriously fickle world of Hollywood, a town where marriages are often treated like short-term public relations contracts. Patrick and Lisa had met as teenagers back in Houston, Texas, long before the fame, the money, and the suffocating global adoration. Lisa was just a 15-year-old dance student taking lessons from Patrick's mother. They were married in 1975, forging an ironclad bond that survived the ruthless machinery of the entertainment industry, the devastating crush of paparazzi, the tragic loss of a child through miscarriage, and Patrick's own well-documented, grueling battles with alcohol addiction and personal demons. She was the one person on Earth who saw him not as the cinematic icon, not as the sexiest man alive, but as the flawed, deeply complex human man underneath the Hollywood veneer. But willpower and love alone cannot rewrite human biology. After 20 agonizing months of fighting a relentless war that he simply could not win, the cancer metastasized violently to his liver. The man who had once effortlessly lifted Jennifer Grey above his head in that iconic lake scene was now wasting away before the eyes of the public. The paparazzi, displaying the absolute worst traits of predatory journalism, ruthlessly stalked his every single move during this incredibly vulnerable time. They camped out outside his medical facilities, deploying invasive long lenses to capture photographs of his emaciated, shrinking frame. They published these cruel, highly invasive images on the covers of supermarket tabloids, running sensationalized headlines that treated his dying process as a cheap spectator sport. They essentially broadcasted his tragic physical deterioration to the entire world, counting down his remaining days for corporate profit. For a man whose entire career, core identity, and self-worth were deeply intertwined with physical vitality, this public stripping of his dignity could have easily shattered his spirit. It could have driven him into a dark, reclusive hiding, consumed entirely by bitterness and resentment. Instead, it forced him to completely strip away his own ego. He realized that holding onto his vanity was a useless expenditure of his rapidly depleting energy. He continued to do interviews, appearing on national television, openly discussing his fear, his anger, and his desperate, fading hope for a medical miracle. He bravely allowed the world to see him vulnerable, completely obliterating the macho facade of Dalton from Roadhouse. As the late summer of 2009 slowly came to an end, it became agonizingly clear that the medical options had been completely exhausted. There would be no miraculous, headline-making remission. The punishing treatment stopped. The primary goal definitively shifted from fighting the disease to managing the terrifying transition from this world to whatever comes next. Patrick was brought back to his beloved ranch, a place where he could be completely surrounded by the horses he cherished, the sweeping landscapes he deeply loved, and the absolute quiet of nature. He was comfortably confined to a hospital bed set up directly in the house. By this point, the devastating disease had ravaged him so completely that he weighed a fragile, heartbreaking 90 pounds. The muscular, commanding, larger-than-life presence that once filled the silver screen had been completely reduced to a delicate, almost childlike physical state. Throughout his traumatic battle with cancer, Patrick often found himself heavily reflecting on the deeply philosophical themes of his blockbuster hit, Ghost. In that iconic film, His character, Sam Wheat, is tragically murdered in a dark alley mugging and is forced to navigate the terrifying, unseen spiritual realm as a wandering soul. Before finally crossing over into the warm, inviting light of the afterlife, he looks at the woman he passionately loves and tells her with absolute, unwavering certainty, "It is amazing, Molly. The love inside, you take it with you." That fictional line of dialogue, written by a screenwriter decades earlier to sell movie tickets, suddenly transcended cinema. It became the absolute, defining truth of Patrick Swayze's waking life. As his physical body disintegrated, his spiritual understanding deepened immensely. He realized that the massive bank accounts, the global fame, the broken box office records, the prestigious awards, and the magazine covers meant absolutely nothing at the edge of eternity. You cannot pack your legacy into a suitcase. The only currency that genuinely mattered, the only tangible thing that could survive the terrifying, unknown transition of death, was the profound love he had cultivated with the people around him. On a quiet Friday evening in September 2009, the end was rapidly, undeniably approaching. Patrick had spent the last few days slipping in and out of consciousness. The grueling, relentless fight had finally taken its ultimate physical toll, and he was preparing to leave his failing, exhausted body behind. He gently opened his eyes and looked directly at Lisa. This was the woman who had loved the unknown teenager in Texas. This was the woman who had stood fiercely by him through the chaotic, dizzying heights of global superstardom. And this was the woman who was now watching him take his final, shallow breaths. In that incredibly sacred, deeply fragile moment, he did not deliver a grand, sweeping philosophical monologue. He did not express blinding anger at the deep unfairness of his early demise or panic about what was waiting for him on the other side. He did not try to offer a profound final quote for the history books. He simply looked into the eyes of the only woman he had ever truly loved and whispered, "I love you." Those were the last words Patrick Swayze ever spoke on this. The raw, beautiful simplicity of that highly intimate moment is absolutely shattering. Shortly after whispering those 3 words, he slipped into a deep, irreversible coma. Over the subsequent weekend, Lisa sat with him in a state of quiet devastation, holding his hand, gently brushing his hair, and listening to the tiny, struggling sips of air he was taking. She explicitly noted in her moving memoir that there was something delicate, almost incredibly childlike about his breathing in those final, heartbreaking hours. On the quiet morning of Monday, September 14, 2009, those breaths completely, peacefully stopped. The invincible star was gone. He was just 57 years old. Why do those 3 words, "I love you," break us so completely? Why does this specific story resonate so deeply across different generations of fans? Because they represent the absolute, ultimate dismantling of the celebrity myth. When the physical armor of the invincible movie star was entirely stripped away by a merciless, unforgiving disease, what remained was not bitterness, not crippling fear, and not Hollywood ego. What remained was the purest distillation of the human experience. His final words bridged the massive gap between the fictional romance we watched on a movie screen and the very real, terrifyingly vulnerable reality of saying goodbye to your soulmate in the real world. Patrick Swayze spent his entire life entertaining us by pretending to be a hero. But in his final 20 months, stripped of painkillers, fighting through unimaginable agony, working 12-hour days while dying, and clinging only to the pure love of his wife, he showed us what a real hero actually looks like. He proved that his famous movie line was not just a clever piece of Hollywood scriptwriting. He proved that when everything else falls away, you really do take the love with you. The story of Patrick Swayze teaches us a beautiful, moving lesson about vulnerability and human connection. But Hollywood hides incredibly dark, devastating secrets when it comes to the psychological pressure placed on its biggest stars. If this deep dive completely changed how you view Patrick Swayze's life and legacy, you will not believe the hidden psychological turmoil behind another iconic star's final moments. The industry demands sheer perfection, but the human mind can only take so much pressure before it completely fractures. Click the video on your screen right now to discover the chilling, untold truth behind Robin Williams' last days and the medical mystery that the mainstream media completely got wrong. Click the video now, and I will see you over there.